Your Excellency, Néstor Osorio, President of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and Heads of Delegations, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to President Néstor Osorio for kindly inviting me to participate in this ECOSOC high-level meeting. I would also like to acknowledge the hospitality with which we have been welcomed in this historical and beautiful city of Geneva by the Swiss authorities, and express the honor it is for me to take part in this event with such a group of distinguished panelists representing different institutions within the Bretton Woods system. Your Excellencies, the Great Recession has had an unprecedented cost for the global economy. According to a report published by the U.S. Government Accountability Office in February of this year, the 2008 financial crisis cost the U.S. economy more than $22 trillion. The agency stated that the financial crisis toll on economic output may be as much as $13 trillion, an entire year's gross domestic product. Paper wealth lost by U.S. homeowners totaled $9.1 billion. Consumption dropped much more severely than in any other recent economic meltdown. Other sources indicate that developing and developed nations have seen 20 million jobs disappeared since the beginning of the 2008 financial crisis. Various nations have reached double-digit unemployment rates. Spain specifically has 26% of its working population without a job. Youth unemployment now exceeds 30% in Greece, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. It is greater than 15% in two-thirds of advanced economies. Furthermore, the crisis had large spillovers in the developing world. In a resolution of the 65th General Assembly of the United Nations, dedicated to the follow-up of the outcome of the Millennium Summit, it is clearly stated that, quote, "The financial and economic crisis has reversed development gains in many developing countries and threatens to seriously undermine the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals." Today, a total of 178 million children under 5 have difficulties growing as a result of lack of food, and the number of people who have become malnourished worldwide has climbed to at least 1 billion. Due to the global economic downturn, 53 more million people will fall into extreme poverty. In rural areas, more than 19% of the population from poor countries does not have access to clean water, nearly 5 times more than in urban areas, and the target of 75% coverage of access to sanitary facilities will not be met in 2015. Your Excellencies, the total cost of the crisis may even be larger if we take into account the impact it has had on innovation, which is the main engine for economic growth. Innovation plays indeed a major role to increase productivity, and it is the key driver to improve our human condition. Progress made in healthcare, for example, raised our living standards. The pacemaker, artificial heart transplants, MRI, biomedicine, nanotechnologies used in surgery, HIV treatments, all changed our lives. Thanks to those breakthroughs, life expectancy in the world increased by more than 15 years on average in the second half of the 20th century. New technologies of communication completely changed the way we work, move, and relate to each other. From the microprocessor to Facebook, miniaturization technologies, satellite communications, mobile devices, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence have all transformed our habits, made the world smaller, and promoted dialogue among cultures. 4 years after the burst of the housing bubble, the number of patent applications in most countries has yet to recover from its pre-crisis trend. Investments in research and development by businesses were highly affected. In Japan and the UK, for instance, they dropped respectively by 12% and 5% between 2007 and 2009. In other words, the crisis disrupted the innovation process. Multiple factors can explain this damage. On the demand side, the drop of consumption in the US, estimated at $175 per month per person, caused a much lower demand for higher quality, innovative products, as people tend to buy low-cost substitutes. On the supply side, companies face too many uncertainties to invest in product design. Furthermore, austerity programs implemented in the US and Europe due to the surge of public debt were not favorable to large investments in research and development. In the Eurozone, for instance, the public spending in research and development significantly decreased after 2009. Finally, the credit crunch led to the fragility of the banking sector, made it difficult for businesses, especially small businesses, to find financial support to their activities and innovative projects. Total corporate loans fell 8% in Spain, 4% in Ireland, and an average 2.7% in the Eurozone this year, the biggest drop in 2 years according to Morgan Stanley. The question is, how did all this happen and what can we learn from it? The great progress we have experienced in the last decades has been accompanied by a change in economic thinking, led by market liberalization in the 70s and total market deregulation since the 80s. It was indeed assumed that markets were more efficient when self-regulated. In the US, President Nixon began the first liberalization reforms in 1971 in the transport sector for railroads and trucks. The sector was then fully deregulated under the Carter administration, which supported the Airline Deregulation Act, the Staggers Rail Act, and the Motor Carrier Act in 1980. The process then was pursued in telecommunications, energy, and finance by the Reagan administration and Margaret Thatcher, who launched the deregulation of the UK financial sector in 1986, giving rise to the city as a major global financial center. But self-regulated markets induce a winners-take-all effect, which leads to strong inequalities. We observe indeed that inequalities surged worldwide since the 80s. It is, however, striking to see how deregulation became almost a dogma, supported by all international agencies, with several economic studies showing the benefits of deregulation on labor, productivity, and growth. In 2005, assessing the global deregulation process, the IMF conceded that the reforms caused social unrest and political upheavals. But rather than questioning the underlying logic, it concluded that, quote, reforms are most effective if executed in a coordinated fashion. The financial sector followed naturally these liberalization and deregulation trends. As such, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, voted in 1999, removed the constraints set by the Glass-Steagall Act in 1933. Banks were now allowed to own both commercial banking firms and securitized firms. 1 year later, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act completely deregulated the use of over-the-counter derivatives. In less than 10 years, the gross market value of global over-the-counter derivatives multiplied by 10. During this period, new financial tools were designed and commercialized. The first swap was introduced in 1981, and collateralized mortgage obligations were invented in 1982 to package mortgages and sell fractions of them as financial assets. The first credit default swaps appeared in 1994 to provide insurance schemes against the default of a loan, but with one specificity. Anyone could purchase a CDS, even buyers who did not hold the loan instrument. The theory suggests that such financial innovations do improve market efficiency and contribute to reducing asymmetries of information. But then a question arises: what to do when financial products become a source of profit by themselves and for themselves? Since the 90s, the financial sector indeed absorbed more than 1/3 of the total corporate profits in the US. Is such a financialization of the economy compatible with the idea that finance should only be an intermediary in the production process and at the service of innovation? Ladies and gentlemen, there is in fact a strong paradox in this rapid expansion of the financial sector. Taking advantage of the progress made in communication tools, markets made an extensive use of digital technologies to develop new trading techniques. High-frequency trading is maybe the best known example, but there are others. Direct access trading is a technology that allows stock traders to interact directly with stock exchanges, avoiding brokers. Tick size variations can automatically change the way prices are adjusted for each individual stock. Dark pools of liquidity enable a set of investors to trade anonymously large blocks of securities on a separate network hidden to other investors. Those new tools, combined with unregulated and profit-seeking financial contracts, eventually amplified the burst of the housing bubble and transmitted this shock all over the world. In other words, the unregulated finance grew thanks to innovations, but then severely damaged innovative structures and destroyed human capital. A report from the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations sustained that a trading operation was found that ignored limits on risk-taking, hid losses, dodged oversight, and misinformed the public. It is called synthetic credit derivatives portfolio. Really, few people know what it means, but it created a loss of over $6 billion US. Finance, Your Excellencies, is meant to allocate resources for the real economy and should only act as an intermediary at the service of innovation and therefore of development. And there is a strong need to mobilize financial resources to overcome the challenges we're facing and will face in the future. In the health sector, HIV, malaria, genetic diseases, and cancer are today urgent priorities. Innovations in healthcare can result in more convenient, more efficient, and less expensive treatments. New drugs, diagnostic methods, drug delivery systems, and medical devices will offer the hope of better treatment and care that should be less costly, disruptive, and painful. For example, implanted sensors could help patients monitor their diseases more effectively. The depletion of energy resources also calls for urgent transition patterns in all countries. Deep-water windmills are still under development. Smart grids might enable flexible and efficient distribution of electricity. Environment-friendly exploitation techniques of shale gas could also be promising. The financial sector should be dedicated to developing new products to finance those long-term projects around the globe. Fostering the formation of human capital also needs important resources. Education and lifelong training are indispensable to allow all continents to integrate into the digital economy and contribute to innovative projects. They are necessary to overcome the challenges of long-term unemployment. In every country, a culture of innovation should be taught at school, and a whole new generation should be given the tools to successfully address health, energy, water supply, and agricultural challenges. We should emphasize science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, at every school level. To do so, initiatives such as e-learning, iTunes Universities, TED Talks, Khan Academy, and Coursera should be generalized. Smart and innovative devices should be manufactured to facilitate the global sharing of ideas, both inside and outside the classrooms. To channel those financial resources, it is necessary to introduce appropriate regulation at the global level. Currently, only national responses are provided to curb the financial sector. The Dodd-Frank Act in the United States was voted in July 2010 and is still under implementation. It represents nearly 400 new rules and mandates. 3 years later, a total of 279 Dodd-Frank rulemaking requirement deadlines have passed. Of these, 175 have been missed and only 104 have been met with finalized rules. This gives some insights on the complexity of the regulation process and the resistance of certain sectors within the financial industry to be regulated. In Europe, many discussions are underway to design and implement an appropriate regulatory framework of the banking sector. A process of regulation is thus just starting. However, the monitoring of financial activities will need a much broader action plan than isolated national or regional regulations. Recent scandals, such as the LIBOR manipulation, show that the opacity of financial activities make regulation a challenge that should be undertaken globally, transparently, and rapidly, since some mortgage-backed securities are already back in the financial markets. Some guidelines for such reforms have already been proposed. For instance, as a response to the manipulation of financial benchmarks, the International Organization of Securities Commission, IOSCO, proposed a framework that should be applied to assess the risks of these financial instruments. In a word, it is of utmost importance that conflicts of interest be avoided thanks to full transparency in market operations. Finally, all must be done to enable developing countries to participate in the knowledge-based innovation economy. As of today, a dramatic innovation gap exists between developed and developing countries. More specifically, high-income countries produce 20 times more patents than middle-income economies. The great majority of developing countries are parties to international treaties regarding patents. Even though patent laws are normally designed to foster innovation by protecting innovators, it has become difficult for middle-income countries to overcome the obstacles and legal difficulties of current intellectual property rules. Different studies have shown that patent laws negatively affect patent filings in developing countries. Indeed, patents are definitely necessary to protect huge investment in research and development. But mechanisms to share technological progress and to reduce this innovation gap should be proposed. It is therefore important to consider whether the current system of intellectual property rights and practices are adequate to encourage innovation, to guarantee technological transfer, and to promote knowledge sharing. As the OECD recognizes, quote, in certain cases, the abuse of the control with which IPR owners are endowed could hamper competition, fair use, and the diffusion of technology, end of quote. This calls for an international action plan to foster innovation within a healthy economic environment. This plan should include new forms of support to businesses, including additional fresh resources for the regional developing banks, creating high-tech incubators, promoting public-private partnerships for innovation, training human resources, facilitating developing countries to fully integrate into the global chain. Ladies and gentlemen, Millennium Development Goals have been a fabulous instrument to focus the attention of the international community on poverty reduction. 3 out of the 8 Millennium Development Targets on poverty slums and water have been met ahead of the 2015 deadline. But the crisis has significantly slowed down the progress on the other targets. Today, the United Nations has set up a task force on the post-2015 development agenda. Interestingly, the first report published by this task force underlined that an essentially unregulated financial system was a threat to development policies. It is therefore necessary to move towards a new economic paradigm to ensure that prosperity can be shared all over the world. This paradigm requires a proper regulation of financial activities in order to make it an essential tool for development. It must prevent new episodes of high price volatility in commodities markets due to speculation. It must prevent loss of competitiveness caused by abnormal capital inflows, and it must prevent the manipulation of benchmarks to restore the credibility of the financial system. Your Excellencies, non-transparent, profit-seeking financial transactions are detrimental to development. Innovative financing instruments are necessary to enable adequate innovation policies, secure long-term economic growth, and foster sustainable development worldwide. I think we can all agree this is the world we want. Thank you very much.